Hello, and welcome to the Microsoft Expert Community Sessions. This is where we invite the best Microsoft experts to help educate you to get the most out of Microsoft technologies. Topics are going to range from M365, governance, Power Platform, Copilot, and plenty of other Microsoft goodness. So please make sure to follow us to get new content. Also, feel free to contact us if there's any topics you'd like us to discuss. So my name is Paul Sutton. I'm part of the Ticket team. Also joining me is Jasper Oosterveld, Microsoft MVP and Modern Workplace consultant from Inspark in the Netherlands. And for those who don't know, Ticket is a leading Microsoft-aligned IT service management platform, all built for the Microsoft Cloud. In today's session, we're going to focus on the extremely important topic of good governance in Microsoft Teams. I know personally from conversations with customers and along with the general exposure of Teams adoption, it's essential for businesses to understand their Teams data, security, access, and just understanding their Microsoft Teams environment. So I know there's a lot to discuss, and I'm got my coffee in hand, so I will pass it over to you, Jasper. Do you want to take it away?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Paul, for having me. So let me start sharing my screen so we can start with the presentation. So I'm going to talk about how you can protect and govern your sensitive data with Microsoft Purview while you're working in Microsoft Teams. But when I do these sessions, I always like to talk briefly about Microsoft Teams, what it is and what it can do and what the business value can be for your organization. So one of the key features is, of course, chat instead of traditionally using email to communicate with each other. I really like chat because it's very informal and there's also some fun features you can use like gifs or smileys. Then, of course, we have meetings, and especially the last couple of years, Microsoft put a lot of effort in improving online meetings. So this is definitely a lot easier to use, very beneficial if you don't want to be on the road all the time, want to visit locations physically, you can definitely do this online as well. Of course, we also have the calling aspect, and with that, I'm more referring to replacing your phone center and then using Microsoft Teams for that. And last but not least, also collaborate. So you collaborate on a daily basis, not only with your colleagues, but maybe also with external people like suppliers or your customers. Well, let's say you implemented this perfectly, everything is working as expected. You can get a lot of business value out of Microsoft Teams. And what I really like is the integrated experience. And with this, I'm referring to the fact that you can use the Microsoft Teams application with a lot of other things as well. So you can, for example, view your agenda without needing to go to Outlook. You can go to your internet portal without opening the browser. So you can do a lot within Teams without using other applications. And by doing so, you can be a lot more focused. And this really will help you increasing your productivity. At least that's something I can see for myself. Without switching too much between applications, I do notice I'm more focused and I get more done. And last but not least, there's also a lot of empowerment for employees. They need less help from IT to get their job done. Right? They can, for example, create a team by themselves. They can use tabs to integrate, for example, Microsoft apps or other third-party apps. They can easily collaborate with their colleagues. So there's a lot more empowerment for employees, and it will also help you as an IT professional to reduce your workload so you can focus more on other stuff. There are, of course, a lot of challenges. One of these is especially, you could have an explosion of teams. I mentioned the fact that employees can create teams by themselves. Well, let's say you do that without any governance in place, you could end up with not maybe hundreds or maybe even thousands of teams, making it very difficult to manage all these teams, right? Because especially if you're an IT professional, they will ask you, Jasper, we have hundreds of teams. Can you please manage these? And you would have no idea where to start. You don't know if these teams are still being worked in. You don't know if there's any sensitive data in it. You don't know if it's archived. So it will definitely increase your workload. Of course, you want to also collaborate externally, but you want to do this in a safe manner. So this is where guest access comes into place. So that can be a bit of a challenge, right? You need to know what are the implications of allowing your employees to share not only documents with guests, but maybe also inviting them within teams to participate as a member. Although Teams has been around for many years, there are still a lot of customers out there that are just starting to use Teams or haven't. And for those people, it is really a new way of working. Especially if you're more an IT-minded person, everything seems very self-explanatory, but this is not always the case for every employee out there. And last but not least, with all this data being stored in Teams or being migrated to Teams and SharePoint, it's very important to stay compliant. There's a lot of law and regulations out there, depending, of course, the country you live in or the industry you work in. But this is difficult because you don't want to get into trouble around this topic. So what are my recommendations? On one hand, I always recommend to start with defining your governance strategy for using Microsoft Teams within your organization. I also advise to set up an adoption and change management strategy to help people who are new to Teams, or maybe they have been working with Teams for a while, but maybe not in the way you intended it to be. You need to make sure the identities that people connect to Teams with are safe. You also need to look at managing your devices, so making sure that your employees work with managed devices that have their security set up, and maybe you will also implement some features that, for example, prevent people without an unmanaged device from your organization to actually access Microsoft Teams and SharePoint. And last but not least, that's the topic for today. You need to make sure that you have a data security strategy so that you prevent, for example, unauthorized access to your sensitive data. So let's focus in on that a little bit. Also around this topic, there's a lot of challenges for organizations. It's very crucial that you set up an information security policy, basically defining how do I classify my data? And if I have a certain classification, what is the impact from a security point of view? This is just a small part of an information security policy, but for a lot of customers, this is not finished. They don't have like one document where this is all present. It's often very scattered. And it's also not easy to actually define what is sensitive information for my organization. Especially with Microsoft Teams, your data is scattered. Microsoft Teams makes use of multiple Microsoft 365 services. And we'll dive a little bit more into these three topics in a second. Especially these days, there's a lot of internal threats. Can be employees that have a bad intention. They maybe want to share sensitive data with the competition. Most of the time, they often share something unintentionally. It's not always the intention to, for example, create a data breach, but this does happen more and more often. And again, you're dealing with a lot of law and regulations that are continuously updated, and new ones are introduced as well. It's very difficult to keep up with this. So you can say, okay, I can see the challenges, but I don't care. I'll just leave it for now. I'm focusing on other things. You can definitely do that. I don't recommend it, but because there are a couple of very important risks. One of them is that you can get a pretty hefty fine. Again, this differs per country, of course. But for example, a couple of years ago, a hospital in the Netherlands, it was concluded that they provided unauthorized access to patient files. And I believe they got a fine around €500,000. That's such a waste of money that can be used for more important things. But I think maybe, apart from the financial side of things, I think a reputational damage is even worse. Because if your company comes up in the news and it appears that you have not been safe with your customers' data, that can have really big consequences. Because the reputation of your company can go down, and this can result in loss of trust. So that can mean that customers are like, you know what? Yeah, they're nice people, but they don't handle my data safely. I'm going to the competition, right? So I definitely don't underestimate these risks. So if you look at information security policy, what can you do? Well, I always advise to start with defining a data classification policy. This basically means, how do I classify all data within my organization? I'm going to share you a couple of examples we and Microsoft also recommends using. For example, you can have public data. This means that maybe the email I'm working on or the Word document I'm working on, the content in it is intended for the public anyway. right? Maybe I'm working for a museum and I'm writing a newsletter. So if this is shared externally or maybe internally, there's no breach of confidentiality. Yeah? There's no big problem if this data is being shared externally or maybe internally with other colleagues. Then, of course, you come to general data. Right? This is data that's often intended for internal use. And again, but there can be a potential breach of confidentiality with external sharing. Right? This can happen. So what we then advise is to also create a classification policy called confidential. And on one hand, you can have confidential internal. This basically means that the document stored in Teams is only intended for your organization. So if this is classified as confidential internal, it should never be shared externally. But of course, you can also have data that is intended for external use, for example, for your customer, or maybe for a couple of employees for that customer. Then you can use confidential external. But this is just classifying. We haven't really talked about protecting it. So that's what you do with your data security policy. Like I said, the first example, public, there's no security. The data is not protected, right? So the Word document with this classification can just be shared externally and everybody can access it. Again, with general, I said the data can be intended for internal use, so it should not be shared externally. But often we recommend not protecting it, because if you automatically protect all your data being classified general, and a lot of this is being shared intentionally external, they cannot open it. So that will be very frustrating, right? So that's why we advise to look at confidential internal. So if a Word document or PowerPoint or PDF is classified confidential internal, everybody within your organization can open it. You can share it externally, but they cannot open it because there's a security applied to that Word document or to that PowerPoint presentation. But you can also allow for a presentation to be specifically shared with another company. That means that everybody within the company can open it. Is it shared with a different company? They cannot do that. And I'll talk in a second how Microsoft Purview can help with this. But if we look, for example, sensitive information types, there's a couple of examples. On the left bottom, you see the generic ones, right? Social security number, from a driver's license number to a physical address. So these are often the most common sensitive information types within your organization. But there can also be specific ones just applying to you as an organization. You can, for example, have medical information, or you have intellectual property, or maybe you do a lot of mergers and acquisition. That is specific organizational sensitive information for your organization. So how do you identify this? Like, the generic ones are easy. That almost every organization I talk to, I work with, they'll use the common ones: social security, passport number, driver's license number, etc. What you can do to identify all of them is to talk to stakeholders. So, for example, you go to departments and you talk to the department head and you ask him or her, okay, talk to me about your process. What kind of processes do you have? And do you generate any information? And if so, is this information sensitive? What will happen if this is being shared internally with unauthorized people or externally? You can also look at Microsoft Purview. So the generic ones you saw, they're automatically provided by Microsoft. So Microsoft, they offer over 300 sensitive information types. So you can go to the Microsoft website or just Google Microsoft Purview sensitive information types. You get a long list. You can look at that as well for inspirational purposes. But again, you can also see what kind of law regulations apply to my organization, and they often also provide a list of sensitive information types you can use. But also a very interesting one is to actually think, okay, what will happen if this type of information is shared externally? So what will be the impact of this? So that's what I call the impact of data loss. Would that be really bad for us? And if so, how bad would it be? That often also helps you to really identify specific sensitive information for your organization. Scattered data. So I took this this table from a source. You can see it at the bottom of the slide. But more interesting, you can see how many different locations there are for features within Microsoft Teams. It varies from Exchange Online to SharePoint to OneDrive and even tasks for Planner to do. And you will notice over the years how many more features will be added to Teams. Maybe additional locations will be added as well. This means that there's not just one location you need to look into to protect your sensitive information. You really need to think about, okay, where is everything stored and how can we use Microsoft Purview to protect this? And that's what I'll show you today as well in this presentation. So if we look at Microsoft Purview, it's a very extensive suite, right? This used to be called Compliance, but Microsoft rebranded it, I believe, a year or maybe 2 years ago. And it's now divided between, on the right side, unified data governance. That's not my area of expertise, but it resolves around data mapping, SQL databases. And on the left side, you have risk and compliance. And you can already see a couple topics there: information protection, data loss prevention to data lifecycle management. So there's a lot of features there, and we'll discuss a couple of these. But these are what I call part of data security. But I also think it's really important, especially if you've been working in Microsoft 365 and Microsoft Teams for a while, to also start analyzing your current situation. So to do this, you can use a couple of these Microsoft Purview services you saw on a previous slide. So one of these is the Compliance Manager. What you can do, if you go to this in the Microsoft Purview Administration Center, you will immediately get a score based on the Microsoft Data Protection Baseline. This data protection baseline takes elements from different assessments, GDPR, for example. There's a couple other ones as well. And it looks, okay, how are you compliant to parts of these baseline. So what you'll often notice is that your score will be low or you will be around 60, but it's often because of Microsoft. Because you can see in the slide that in this case, that Microsoft scored almost 12,000 points. And that's good because that means they have their stuff in order, right, on their side. But this will give you some good insights and, hey, what do I need to work on to be more compliant to certain regulations? What you can also do is use the Content Explorer. So within the Content Explorer, you can look for a sensitive information type, for example, an international banking account number, and you can see how often this sensitive information type, in this case 20, is detected and where. So you can see the locations. So I can see, for example, that in OneDrive, there are 2 locations where an IBAN number is detected. But you can imagine if maybe you have agreements where you say it's not allowed in our organization to store files with an IBAN number in your OneDrive. And this allows you to detect where this happens. So you can talk to that employee and then ask him or her, hey, why is, often it's not intentional, and then you can talk with him or her about it, and then maybe move that file to a different location. Of course, you're probably thinking like, hey, this is very sensitive information, right? And you're looking into people's OneDrives. Very true. So that's why I need to make good agreements internally who is allowed to do this, because you can give out specific permissions to use the Content Explorer. It's not that everybody has automatic access to this. You can also use the Activity Explorer, and this gives you good insights around, for example, how often a DLP policy, we'll talk about it later, is detected and where. So this gives you can really see where sensitive information is being stored or shared within your organization, right? So again, these are very important things to remember. If you're already using Teams for a while or Microsoft 365, look at the Compliance Manager, start looking at Content Explorer based on your sensitive information types, and also take a look at the Activity Explorer. Okay, now let's take a look how you can protect your sensitive information with Microsoft Purview Information Protection. There is a certain scope applied to MIP. The first one is items and email. And items can be a PDF, maybe Word, or a PowerPoint presentation or Excel. You can also apply it to meetings. You do need the Microsoft Teams Premium license for this, but let's say you have that, you can apply a classification and protection to your meetings. You can also apply this to a Microsoft 365 group. So in the scope of this presentation, that will be a team in Microsoft Teams. And last but not least, you also can apply to a Purview data map. That is that right side of the Purview slide I showed you. So this can be SQL data, for example. So we talked about classification and protection, and how do you do this with Purview? Well, you use what they call sensitivity labels. So by applying a sensitivity label, you can classify, for example, a Word file. And depending on the configuration of the sensitivity label, you can protect it as well. We'll take a look at that later too. The biggest advantage is that you can apply an encryption. And an encryption that makes sure that only authorized people are allowed to view the Word file or the presentation or the Excel sheet or the PDF. And the nice thing is it travels with the document. So it doesn't only apply to Microsoft Teams, but imagine somebody is downloading a Word document that's classified and protected with encryption, and then stores it in Dropbox. The the encryption is still applied. Yeah, it doesn't matter if it's inside Microsoft 365 or outside. And if we look again at the meetings aspect, you can really have more safe and controlled meetings. You can, for example, disable copying a chat from the chat message in Teams and in the Teams meeting, for example. Or you can control who can do recordings. So there's definitely a couple of interesting options there. We won't go over it in demos in this presentation, but if you have a requirement within your organization about having more safe and controlled meetings, this is definitely interesting to look at. So it's Microsoft Teams Premium. But you're probably wondering, okay, it sounds great, but how do I use these sensitivity labels? How do I classify? You can do it manually, right? You can manually apply a label to a Word document, a PowerPoint presentation, but the true power lies in automatic classification. Because you have to remember, it's not always clear for most people if something is sensitive, yes or no, and that it needs to have a certain classification. That's not everybody knows that, and how are they supposed to know that, right? So this is where automatic really steps in and is really powerful. I do want to not warn you, but I do want to mention that you at least need an E5 or a similar license for that, or the compliance add-on. So definitely talk with Microsoft or your license expert to see what license you need to start using automatic classification. If we look at that, there's again how it works. It can work at what we call data in transit. So I am, for example, working on a document, sensitive information is detected, I'm sharing it with another colleague, and then label is applied. You can also do this for data that already exists within your Microsoft 365 environment. You can also use an auto labeling feature. So for example, you point out a couple of SharePoint sites and you say, if the contents stored in those sites contain an IBAN number, then apply this sensitivity label. We're almost there, we're almost at the demos. How do you detect sensitive information? You use those sensitive information types, right? Social security number, IBAN number, etc. Those are the easy ones. You can also use what they call trainable classifiers. And with trainable classifiers, it's more a category of documents. So I'm looking for HR documents, contract documents, resume documents, right? You can also use exact data match, and that's used when you want to detect sensitive information that's stored in databases. You can also look at document fingerprinting, and that's used when you use a lot of templates. So imagine your HR department as one template for maybe the onboarding process, and that template contains sensitive information. You can use that to detect it, and then, for example, automatically apply a sensitivity label. And you can also use SharePoint Premium, that used to be called SharePoint Syntax, that also allows you to assign sensitivity labels based at specific sensitive information that's being used. So if we look at the first scenario, we often get the request for multiple collaboration templates in Teams. You can imagine that there is a demand for example, a type of projects. You can have internal projects, maybe external projects, maybe merger projects. And in this case, for each project, there are unique requirements for being able to invite external people and maybe also allow external sharing. So in this case, Jane, she wants to have an internal project. And if it's And if you create a team that's an internal project, you're not allowed to invite external people or share externally. So let's take a look. So I'll go to my demo environment and I will go to Microsoft Teams. So let me do that again. Bear with me. Let me open it. So I'm going to do it through the Microsoft Teams application. So I'm going to create a new team by doing it like this. Don't worry, you can also use a provisioning solution to also assign a label to a team. That's possible as well. Our demo tenant just doesn't have that feature. So if I go to create team, I say from scratch, I now have the option to choose a sensitivity. So if I go to project, I can see I have the option project internal, external, and mergers. Well, in this case, I'm creating an internal one. Automatically, the privacy option is set to private. I cannot select public or org wide. Now let me create one. Go. Now I click on create. Now it's creating the team. Very fine. It's very difficult. So now, for example, if I want to add Jane, my colleague, that's fine. But let's say I want to invite I want to invite an external person. You can already see this is not possible. It's a little bit annoying that it doesn't give you a better warning, but unfortunately that's just the way it is. So let's say I now close. And let's say I upload a file here. Go to documents, just upload a demo document. And let's say I try to share this document externally, you will notice that I'm also not able to do that. So let's go to share. And okay, perfect. So now let's say I do this one again. Go. So now I will say we couldn't find an exact match, but again, this should mention that it's an external user. So let me try another email address, see if this one works. No, I don't know why this happens. Let me see if I go to this one. No. Oh, they changed the. This is so annoying. Here we go. People you choose. Let's see if it works now. 1 second. No, but unfortunately, I don't know why this happens, but it should mention this is an external person, so you cannot share. But let's say I want to do it with Alex. I think that's one of my internal colleagues. You can see there's no problem. I can just share this document. So how does this work from a configuration point of view? So if I go to the Purview Admin Center, I go to Information Protection, I go to Labels. You will notice that once this is done loading, that I created a couple labels for working with Teams in Microsoft Teams, but I also have a couple ones for working with documents, for example. So if I go to Project, and now I go to Project Internal, and I click on Edit Label. Now, these are just the general settings, so the name and the description. If I go to Next, you can see I can select the scope here. So the scope is groups and sites in this case. These settings don't apply anymore because of the scope I selected. And now it asks me, okay, define the protection settings for groups and sites. And of course, also Teams and Microsoft Teams. I want to decide the privacy and external user access and external sharing and conditional access. Go next. And here you can see private. And that's the reason I was not able to select a different privacy type because of this option. If I would have selected this, then during the creation process, I could pick a public or a private. This is the reason I cannot invite external people because this box is not ticked. If I go to next, this is the reason I cannot share externally because I say I can only share with people in my organization. You can also use conditional access to, for example, prevent that external people without a managed device have full access to all the options within your SharePoint document library. So, for example, you can tell them they only have web access. So that means they cannot open the Word file in their Microsoft Word application. They can only do it through the browser. So now if I go back here, I'll go to the tips and tricks. It's really, I don't know why my mouse is so annoying. Let me check. Let me see if I can do it like this. There we go. Sorry about this. Let me go down. Perfect. Tips and tricks. So Let's say you work with labels for Teams, Microsoft Teams. Owners are always able to change the label. So this, for example, can mean that somebody changes it from project internal to external to, for example, start sharing files externally. There is a way to prevent this in a way that they cannot select any of the other labels, but then there's an option that is just blank. So what you can do is, for example, only publish these labels to one account. And that means only the person with that account or the provisioning account, they can change it to other labels, but the owners can't. There's always a way to monitor it though. So you can use the Activity Explorer or the audit to see which employees actually changed the label. Like I mentioned before, you can connect this with your provisioning solution. There's no problem at all. And I briefly talked about conditional access. If you want to use this, make sure you talk to your Intune colleagues so that your policies don't intervene with each other. There is also a way to use PowerShell to define the default sharing link. And that is automatically sharing something by viewing or editing it for the SharePoint site and the site sharing settings. This is not, you cannot do this for now through the to the UI, so you have to use PowerShell. So now we move on to the next one. So for example, in this case, Alex is part of the Hammond Robotics and Mergers and Acquisitions team. They have all their information is highly sensitive. And they're now working on a merger called Project MRVN. And he wants all the content that is related to this project to be automatically protected. So what can we do? So again, if we go back to our demo environment, and now let me cancel this one. And I go to Teams, and I click here. So I already created this, of course. So I have a team here. So if I go to General, and I go to Files, and imagine I upload a file here. So go to Upload Files. And let me just use, this one is fine. Yeah, it's uploading it. So now you can see it's here. And now if I go back, I hope it works. Otherwise, I'll refresh it. So what I will do, let me see. So what it should do now, it should automatically apply a label called, here we go. Yeah, no. What I will do, I'll open it in SharePoint because sometimes because of caching, it takes a little bit of time. So if I go here, it will just take a little bit of time, so I'll refresh it later, but what will happen, it will automatically apply this label. So it will automatically apply to all new files or files that are being changed, the label highly confidential project MRVN. And how does that work? So if I go to the library settings, you will see that you can select a default sensitivity label. So you can see all the labels that are available, but I want this one to be applied. And it means that within the encryption settings of this label, only the members of this Microsoft 365 group, only they are allowed to view the content. So let me see if this works. No, I don't know why. I think it's a little bit of a caching issue. That is fine. But it works. just believe me for it. So this is, again, this is easy. But what you could also have is that people are maybe mentioning parts of this project in other locations. So for example, if I go to this team and I go to Files, you'll see that the label is applied here as well. And why is that? Now, for example, if I go to modified, new to older. So if I go, let me check. Yeah, this one. So I created this document. And what you will see is that you can see here that there's a keyword called Project MRVN. And because that keyword is applied, the label is automatically changed to highly confidential Project MRVN. So how does that work? So if I go to labels, now first of all, I'll go to the sensitive information types, because what I've done, I created a new one. So if I go to data classification, classifiers, and I go to sensitive information types, and I search for Project MRVN, there we go. So what I have done, and let's see, it should be done loading. Yeah, so let me edit it. So go to next. So you can work with patterns to detect the sensitive information. I kept it very simple. I just work with keywords. So if I click here, you can see that I have a keyword list. So I define here that if this is used, MR3N or Project MR3N or something else, if that's detected within a text or in a document, it means that this sensitive information type is applicable to it. So if I now close this one, go to this label, and I click on Edit Label, now we'll go to the settings. You see, we want to apply, remove, and encryption, and we apply content marking. So here are the encryption settings. So I configure here that if this label is applied, I assign permissions immediately, and these are the permissions. So I have co-author permissions for everybody who is part of this group. And the permissions you can change. So for example, if I go here, there are different levels. So these are Microsoft provides these, and you can see that these are all the actions related to it. So for example, if I go to viewer, you can see I'm not allowed to print it anymore. So this option will also be disabled. You know? So that's something you have to determine as well. You have to determine who is allowed to have access and what kind of access. So now to cancel. So if I go now to next, these are the content markings, so I can give it a footer or a header. And here I apply automatic labeling. So I configure that if this sensitive information type is detected, what I showed you in the previous menu, then this label is automatically applied with this message. You can also just give a recommendation. That's totally fine. Again, that depends on your requirements. So that is the reason that a document in a different team has this label applied. So go back to the slide. If you start working with a default document library label, there's of course a couple scenarios that exist with documents that have an existing label. So again, you'll get the slides later, of course, but here you can see what will happen in which scenario. Microsoft in the past worked with what they call the unified labeling client. That one is in maintenance mode. It basically means Microsoft is not developing it anymore. They will soon make it unavailable. But that label was used to use sensitivity labels. But all these labels are now built in within Office or within the PDF client. There is sometimes I have customers that still have this client and they have some issues with labels appearing within Office. So that can be that that's the case. So if you have that issue, see if the client exists and maybe you need to remove it to make sure the built-in labels work. I got a lot of requests from customers asking, okay, I work with a lot of images. Can I also detect sensitive information? That wasn't possible, but now it is. There's an OCR feature that's in preview that allows you to detect sensitive information types within images. This is an interesting one. So imagine you assign a sensitivity label that applies an encryption. If you lower the label, the encryption is not always removed. If you use a label called, for example, general, I'd recommend using using the option called remove encryption. So if I remove the label confidential internal and apply general, that encryption is automatically removed. It makes life a lot easier for your employees. You can also use labels assigned to departments or specific teams or projects, like you saw in the example. But for example, there's also, for example, you can also say I have a label for HR, for R&D. So everybody who works within the department automatically gets that label with its connected settings. One major downside is that if you encrypt the file and you share it externally and that person externally is allowed to access it, but he or she doesn't have a Microsoft account, you cannot open it. And so that's, for example, with Gmail, for example, that you can share it with Gmail, but they have no way of opening it. It's frustrating, but yeah, I don't know if that will be fixed anytime soon, but it is something to keep in mind. So now moving towards how you can prevent a data leak with the use of Purview data loss prevention. So by using DLP, you can really identify sensitive information being stored or shared within your organization or outside your organization. You can monitor where this is happening, who is doing this. And if you want, you can also protect it, for example, by blocking the sharing action or by applying a label. What are the locations you can do this? Now, of course, Microsoft 365, that makes sense, right? You can also use DLP for devices. This basically means that if I copy text with a sensitive information in it, in, for example, Notepad, I can also prevent that by using a DLP for devices. You can also use cloud apps, so then you can work with external apps, for example, Dropbox or Box or any other third-party application. And you can also use it on your data that is stored on your on-premises servers. In this scenario, we're looking at Teams. So what we want to do, Alex, again, wants to prevent that any mention of this this project MRVN, any mention of it is detected in any other Teams, that is forbidden. It's basically not allowed. That should be blocked. So how can we do that? So if we go to Teams, let me close this one. So if we go here and we close this file and we go just, for example, to this team, you see I've done it before, so that's fine. So what I can do now, no, I just want to do it different. Let me see if I haven't done it. I've done it in too many teams. There we go. Strategies. Well, you know what? I'm just going to create a new channel. Here we go. It's called demo. It's very simple. Click on add. Yeah, here we go. Now start a post. So imagine I'm saying project. This is secret information. Don't tell anyone. So now I say, okay, project Armor for In is looking fantastic. Just a simple example. But imagine I'm just trying to like share sensitive information, maybe secret information or sensitive information. I click on post. So what you will notice now, I would say fingers crossed, but this one really works very well. You can see that the message is now blocked and it says, hey, what can I do? Because maybe you're not aware of this, because maybe you're not doing it intentionally. So if I click here, you can see the message is blocked due to organizational policy. This is the sensitive information type. And now this is a message you see. We detected this information, it's forbidden. And what can you do? Well, you can report this, because sometimes DLP can be triggered when it should not be triggered. So you have the report option, but you can also allow people to override it. Right? So how does this work from a configuration point of view? So let's go to the different section now. So now we're going to DLP, going to policies. Let's see, where are you? This one. Yep. So click on edit. Okay, you give it a name, a description. This one we'll skip for now. Here you can decide on the location, right? As I mentioned before, you have the devices on premises, but now we want to focus for this policy on Teams. Click on next. You create a rule for DLP because it needs to know what to do. So I click on edit. So here you can see, again, like before with the auto labeling, I look at the sensitive information type project MR3N, and I say if this if this is restrict access, so if this is being detected, to block everyone. You can also say I just want to block people outside my organization. That can also be the case, again, depending on your requirements. This is the notification that we saw that, right? We saw that as a policy tip. And again, this is the text you also notice in that the pop-up that happens in Teams. This is where you can allow people to override it. So then I do recommend that they're required to add a justification, and this will all be logged, so then you can analyze this at a later time. Again, a couple other settings as well. We'll just leave this for now. But because of this policy that you can turn on immediately, you can also test it out first in the test mode. Because of that, that's the reason that notification happened. So now if we look at the next scenario, I'm just going to stay in this one. So what I also had a customer last year, they said we work with a lot of lists with sensitive information. And lists, they don't mean Microsoft lists, but just like Excel files or Word files with a lot of information from their customers. And they said we identify something as a list that should not be shared if it's 5 or more. So in this case, 5 or more IBAN numbers. So when that happens, people are not allowed to share it externally. So what does that look like? So let's go back here, go to a different team. I believe I used this one. So I've got a files. You will see it's not this one. Let me see where I put it. 1 second. Which one did I put it in? Let me see. I thought it was this one. 1 second. No. Let me see this one maybe. Yeah, here we go. Perfect. So here you have a file called account examples, and you can already see there's a little red. The red is never good in this case. So it already says contains sensitive information. Some commands are not available. So let me first open the file so you can see it. So in this case, you can see there are IBAN numbers. So there's 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think there's another one more. Yeah, 6. So more than 5. So you see, because that happened, you get a policy tip that says we detected the use of 5 or more INAM numbers. You're not allowed to share this externally. So now if I click on more options, I go back to I go back here. You can see I now have the option to report it. So like, hey, I don't know what is happening. I don't understand. You can report it. And then, for example, your CISO or security officer gets an email and they can determine if this is correct or incorrect. You can also override it because there can always be a case when there is sensitive information, but you do have to share it with this external person. Again, this is all logged, so you have the option to review it in a later time. But let's say I go now to this file. I believe it was here. So I select it, I go to share, and now I love it. I love it, the Microsoft update stuff before you do a session. So let's do this one. So I do now this one. Now, see, okay, now again, this item contains, so you cannot share. So this blocks me for sharing it, but I can share it internally if I want to. You see, that's totally fine. So last time, how does this work? So if we go to this policy and I edit it, so you can take a look at the configuration. Yeah, here we go. Click on next, next. You can see these are different locations. I'm just applying it to SharePoint and OneDrive. Again, here we have the rule. And now basically here you will see that if it's more than 5, when it's shared, if people want to share it externally and there's more than 5 IBAN numbers and not less, because if it's less, it's fine, the policy doesn't apply, then block people outside your organization. And again, I have the notifications, I have the policy tip. Again, here you can define who it's sent to. This is the text you noted before. And again, here you can allow people to override it or report an issue with it. And then here you can, for example, say who it needs to be sent to. Yeah. So again, a lot of options. So that's why it's always important to first try out your DLP policy in test mode to see if it works and how it works. So now if you go back to the presentation to round it up. So, here we go. You've seen this one. A couple of tips and tricks. DLP, unfortunately, is not 100% fail-proof. But again, let's say you do need to comply to certain regulations. With this, you can, if you configure this, you can prove, hey, we did everything we could just to prevent this. But this person is so determined, he or she went around all our mechanisms to leak the data. And again, really try out the sensitive information type with real content. So for example, in the menu where you saw that I created a custom sensitive information type, you can also look at the default ones. And there's always a test button where you can upload, for example, a document that contains IBAN numbers. So you can see if it's detected. That allows you to tweak it as well. Because there can be cases where you need to make a copy of an existing one to change some of the patterns to make it to work. Doesn't happen a lot, but sometimes. I always advise, we're not talking about Exchange in this session, but if you use DLP in Exchange, you should create a separate policy, because if you put everything in one, you won't have all the conditions you can pick to configure your rule. So use Exchange separately, and then you'll have more rules, more conditions you can apply to your DLP rule. Yeah, if you have one policy with multiple rules, use one per sensitive information type, because then you can really use that policy tip menu. So you can say rule 1 is IBAN. I detect IBAN numbers. Rule 2 is social security numbers. I detect the social security numbers. So conclusion. So I would really, if you want to get started, and it doesn't matter if you already been working with teams for a while, if you just start doing it, start with a pilot. Just pick one department with an interesting use case, and that's really relevant to the use of Microsoft Information Protection and DLP. And then what you should do is, configure Information Protection and DLP to work with that use case. Yeah. Make sure you provide people with a brief training, show them what it is, how it works, so they get a little bit used to it, right? And then also provide them support. So what we often do is provide a SharePoint portal with like some instructions, basically a lot of stuff that you saw today. And then you need to make sure they start testing it. So test all the features that are applicable to the use case, review it together, and then if everything works, awesome, then go to the next department. If this doesn't work yet, see if you can change certain things. Sometimes it can happen that certain features are not available yet, that a customer says, okay, we see the benefits, but we put it on hold for now. Then see if you can go to a different department where those blockers don't exist. But I definitely advise to do a department per department rollout. So yeah, that was it for me. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to me over my very old school hotmail.com, or you can always connect to me on LinkedIn. That's totally fine as well. And I really, I hope you find it very beneficial, and definitely get in touch if you have any questions or remarks.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Jasper.
Yeah,
Very
no problem.
interesting. Yeah, that was a wealth of great content. So hopefully this really will help customers get a better understanding of governance and controlling team sport, which is a real thing. And if you like this subject and looking to learn more on M365, we do run regular sessions with Microsoft experts just like Jasper. So please feel free to reach out to ticket.ai. We do have a resource section where these sessions are published. If you do have any questions or want to see other topics, then feel free to reach us at teams@ticket.com. And then, as Jasper said, Jasper's published his contact information if you want to stay in contact with him. Actually, before I finish, Jasper, one quick question. Where would you recommend people to go to learn more and continue this journey on good governance with teams?
Yeah, definitely. So what I will do, I will share one or two websites from Microsoft where they have a lot of information around upcoming webinars from Microsoft themselves, where they actually share like what they're working on. So I'll share those links with you, so you can share them with the community as well. Yeah, for certain. Because I don't know the
Awesome.
links out of my head, but.
Okay, no worries. I know there's a lot of great content out there and can be quite difficult to find it. So look, I really appreciate you, Jasper. I really appreciate your time. We would love to have you back. And I believe that's a wrap now. So thanks, everyone. We will see you soon. Take care. Okay, bye now.